Hello and welcome. What I'm going to do is introduce this book to you today. It's called Love and Jello, Rosenberg and Kathy Roden Gogan. This book is ISBN number 978 1 71677 925 1. Library of Congress Control Number 20209 12349. Um, Kathy gave me permission to read this book, allow you to give you an idea of how it's written. I've broken up the video in several parts, so you'll have to watch all of them. Purchase this book today to have a copy of your own. It's an excellent book, and I recommend it as entertainment. Chapter 10, God's Way. The drive up to the big house was fairly quiet for Don. He listened to Alice talk about the latest gossip from the manor, and would interject things at the appropriate time or not, and smile if it seemed warranted. He was preoccupied with thoughts of his mother and the events of a few days before. He tried to shake those thoughts, but seemed to persist. He was hopeful that it was just a bump in the road, since remembering that night in the afternoon always freaked him out a bit. He had not dwelled on it for a long time, and these thoughts to return now so vividly after so long was disconcerting. They stopped for breakfast at a dinner off the highway, which also caused Don to remember some unpleasant things from his past. And an hour late arrived at the hospital. Bud was no longer in ICU, but was still in a coma and being monitored closely. "Oh, Bud," Alice whispered when she saw him in the hospital bed. Page 93, Love and Jello. Page 94, Love and Jello. The ventilator and various tubes and wires he was connected to were a bit overwhelming for her. Don watched leaning on the doorframe, looking at his friend. He had lost a good deal of weight, and his hair had been cut short. He looked frail lying in the bed with various machines beeping and tracking his vital signs on the screens. They each took seats, one on each side, and Alice began talking to Bud. I don't want to use that. She filled him in on the latest from the manor and talked about missing him a lot. Everyone sent the regards. Finally, she quieted, seemingly tired of talking. Watching their friend laying in the hospital bed caused them both to become lost in thoughts of their own mortality. It's one of those sad truths of getting older that eventually some sickness probably would overtake them, or a heart attack would finally finish things for them. Don stood up and excused himself to find some coffee. The box truck pulled up at the manor shortly after the cable arrived. The technician assigned the work to the rest of the cable company had been there before. There was something that was knocking out the cable in the building, but so far he had been able to isolate the problem. He had been working on tracking some of the wirings during the last visit when mysteriously the cable came back on. It was very strange. He was determined to figure out what was causing the intermittent outage today. He had a bag from Chick-fil-A that would toss into the dumpster before he went inside. As he walked to the dumpster, he noticed was overflowing. He added his garbage to the pile and went inside. There was a flurry of activity near one apartment in particular. Page 95, Love and Jello. Excuse me. Wayne was busy directing the workers that were unloading the box truck. "That goes over there. Be careful," he called out as Wayne directed the workers. Ruth was a flurry of activity. She was a cleaning machine and clearly in her element. When Wayne approached her about his plan, he added that and agreed immediately, feeling this was her calling in life. It would be a big task, but she would have help, and although she wouldn't do all the work, she would make sure it was done to her specifications. The cable technician walked to the common area and began his task of figuring out the problem with the cable. Once he tested the wires there and was satisfied that all was supposed to be, he would go into each apartment and test them. Each in turn, it was going to be a long day. Come on, y'all. Time's a wasting, Wayne called out, trying to push friends get things done. Shut up, Wayne, someone said. A few hours later, Don and Alice leaned down to kiss Spud's cheek as if they were going to leave. It was a sweet gesture, and Don could see it how much Alice cared for the man in the bed. It was sobering thought that he might not wake up from the coma, and this might be the last time Alice saw him. Page 96, Love and Jello. Dawn gave her time she needed and said nothing. When she was reading, he put her arms around her and steered her toward the elevator as she cried quietly next to him. We're most done. They'll be here for long, Wayne said to the group. Just got to get things set up and we have everything ready. Going to be interesting how this comes out, Wayne, Eddie said. Wayne smiled. He had been thinking about the same thing, but it was too late to turn back now. The box truck had already left, and the group had all worked all day to make everything come together. Wayne was happy to do this and was anxious to get it done. He was getting hungry, and there would be pizza showing up shortly. Somebody going to hunt down that cable feller and get him to check the wires here to make sure they're good, Wayne ordered, and there's the pizza coming soon. Nadine had made the long trek to the hospital in Pauline's car. She went to Pauline's room to help her sister get ready to make the trip back to the manor. Pauline had recovered enough leaving and was looking forward to getting back to some semblance of normal life, although she didn't know what would be at the moment. During her stay at the hospital, she had ample time, page 97, Love and Jello. She had ample time to think about Robert. It would be doubtful that she'd never know exactly what happened and why Robert had used her and played with her emotions, but assumed all boiled down to money. She had given him quite a bit foolishly, thinking he was in love with her and hoping all would work out with him. She felt lost and alone and stupid. She was also mad at herself as much as Robert. Don't worry, we'll get things sorted out, sis. All will be fine. Nadine could come see the worry and sadness in her sister's eyes. It would be a long road back of being able to be unassisted for her, and she might have a slight limp afterward, but after that, physically, she would be fine. Nadine supposed that in time the emotional scars would heal as well and didn't press her sister too hard when it came to Robert and what had transpired. No sense adding salt to the wound, Nadine thought. Wayne, we'll be happy to see you. He's been bugging me almost every day about how you're doing when we're coming back, Nadine smiled. I hope to see him as well, Pauline replied. She had thought of him during the long nights when she couldn't sleep. She didn't know what would come of her friendship, but whatever it was, it would be interesting. Page 98. Love and Jello. Wayne was a good man. He was simple, but maybe simple was what Pauline needed. She vowed to take things slow and not rush into anything. As Pauline looked around the room and the orderly helped her to the wheelchair that would take her downstairs, she smiled. She was happy to be out of the room, out of the hospital, and on her way back to the manor. There would be more doctor visits and physical therapy appointments for her future, along with some lingering pain, but she was optimistic for the first time in a long time. When the car pulled up a few hours later, Pauline got out. She was a little sore, but somewhat shaky during her crutches. She navigated her way to the door, which Nadine opened for her, and went inside. They proceeded to the door of Nadine's apartment, and Nadine stopped to unlock the door. Sis, there has been a change in plans for the time being, Nadine said. What do you mean? Pauline asked. Page 99. Love and Jello. Well, my apartment is just too small. We thought you might make more comfortable being able to sleep in a bed rather on my couch, considering your leg and all, Nadine said. We? Who's we? Pauline asked, clearly confused as to what was going on. Nadine led her down the hall, stopping in front of one of the doors. She knocked and smiled at her sister. The door opened, and it was dark inside, but as Pauline moved forward, the lights went on, and there was a chorus of surprise from the assembled residents of the manor. Pauline, clearly confused, looked around at the people. There was a look of shock initially, and then she smiled, seeing Wayne step forward. Wayne took her hand and said, "Welcome home, Pauline. Really good to see you." He leaned forward and kissed her cheek and smiled. Page 100. Love and Jello. I hope you won't be too mad, but I had some changes to my apartment while you were gone and was hoping you agreed to stay here temporary, I guess, till you figure out what you want to do next. We got the bedroom all fixed up for you, and you should be pretty comfortable there. Pauline looked around and started to notice that Wayne's one drab apartment with its old dated mismatched furniture had been transformed into a very cozy warm place with all new furniture, a flat screen TV, and all new appliances. Nadine saw her look of bewilderment and whispered, "He did that all for you?" Nadine looked and smiled with a tear in her cheek, which Wayne brushed away. "Thank you, Wayne. This is very sweet of you." Wayne grinned and leaned closer to Pauline's ear and whispered, "Anything for you, darling." To the others, he asked, "Who all wants pizza?" The next hour was spent enjoying company of their friends and eating too much pizza. No one asked anything about Robert, as Wayne said, page 101, Love and Jello. He would beat anyone who mentioned his name to Pauline. The other residents knew Wayne as a peaceful man, but look in his eye when he told the assembled group before Pauline arrived had shown serious he was about that. After everyone had left and Ruth had cleaned the kitchen one final time, Nadine helped her sister settle into the bedroom and said goodbye to Wayne on her way out. Pauline and Wayne were alone for the first time in a long time. Pauline was in bed, tired from a long day, and Wayne was sitting in a chair next to the bed. Pauline looked at Wayne and reached out to him and put her hand in his. She smiled as she quickly dripped off, and Wayne sat next to her, holding her hand in his, thinking about how life changes so quickly sometimes. It was sometimes during the night that he too drifted off, sitting in the chair, still holding Pauline's hand. It was very late when Don and Alice finally pulled into the parking lot at the manor. Both were tired from the events of the day and eager to get some sleep. The ride back was quiet. Both lost their thoughts. They had stopped in for dinner along the way, and Alice talked a little bit about Bud, hoping he would wake up from the coma soon. Don didn't know if he would ever would, but smiled and agreed that it would be a good day when his friend was up and about again. As they said their good nights, Don put his hand on Alice's shoulder and told her if she needed anything, not to hesitate to let him know. Alice smiled and said she would. She went into her apartment and closed the door. Page 102. Love and Jello. Don stood for a moment and sighed as he heard Alice burst into tears behind the closed door. He made his way into his door opened and stepped into the dark apartment. He fumbled the light switch and turned it on. He walked a few paces further and looked around, shocked at what he saw. His apartment was sparkling clean, and there was brand new furniture everywhere. Don looked in the kitchen and turned on the light. Every inch of counter space was clean. There was a new coffee maker, refrigerator. Taped to the outside of the refrigerator was a handwritten note, which Don tore and read off. Don, the residents and I have the only right to help a neighbor in need. It's God's way. Wayne. In the weeks past after the return of Pauline, the residents were fairly quiet. There was no seemingly strange happenings or out of the norm occurrences. People were busy, living their lives in the routines. Wayne and Pauline were frequently seen together walking as part of Pauline's therapy. Page 103, Love and Jello. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to read to page 110. That'll give me 30 pages left. And I'll have, since I'm having an off day today, I'll just go ahead and stop at 110. Love and Jello, page 103. One evening, as they walked slowly, handing outside near the parking lot, Don's car ground to a halt nearby. As he got out walking toward that pair, Pauline had recently begun walking about her crutches, sometimes in making good progress and getting stronger. Wayne was there to support her at every turn, and they had grown closer with each passing day. "Looking good, Pauline," Don said as he approached. "Thanks, Don." Feeling better, Pauline smiled. "Wayne," Don said by the way of greeting. Don Wayne nodded as they eyed each other warily. Don had come to Wayne that afternoon and found the note that thanked him for everything. He was at loss for words at Wayne's kindness and wanted to let him know how much he appreciated it. Don't know what you're talking about, Wayne replied to Don, winking. Thus began an uneasy truce between the two men. It was about this time that Wayne mentioned to Pauline that he had to take a short trip. Pauline didn't ask a lot of questions, as she knew Wayne would be very quiet about things at times. She just took it a part of his way of being and didn't question. She wasn't worried, and it was only going to page 104, Love and Jello, being an overnight trip. He didn't say to where, for what reason he would be going. Wayne left early one morning and returned the next afternoon. When he arrived back to the apartment and was unpacking his clothes, he handed her an envelope with $10,000 cash in it. He said, "This is from Robert." The cuts and scrapes on his knuckles were all she needed to see to guess what happened. He never spoke of the trip, and she never asked what happened. That night, as Pauline laid in bed and Wayne sat in the chair holding her hand before she fell asleep, she whispered to Wayne, "Thank you." Wayne smiled and planted a kiss in the palm of her hand and closed her fingers around it as if to be holding there and whispered back, "Anything for you, darling." Excuse me. Page 105, Love and Jello, Chapter 11, A New Plan. The ambulance pulled to a stop at the main doors to the manor, and the driver got out to open the back doors. A nurse and an aide were present to greet them as a stretcher was unloaded. Wayne walked up to see what was happening. He didn't recognize the man lying there at first, but his eyes lit up as the name came to him. The man on the stretcher looked over at him and raised his hand slowly to wave hello. "Hey, bud, welcome back," Wayne greeted. "How you feeling?" "His voice is so weak he can't walk yet," said the aide. "All right, guess it's good to see you anyway, bud." Wayne smiled. Bud stopped the activity around him and mentioned Wayne closer. Wayne bent down to hear, and Bud's whisper hoarsely, "Hey, Wayne, come and see me later. We need to talk." Wayne looked at him and nodded. He hadn't talked to the man much before, but assumed he wanted to talk about Matt. Maybe Matt and page 106, Love and Jello. Wayne had spent a fair amount of time together since Matt arrived at the manor. Whatever the case, Wayne was willing to hear what the man had to say. "I'll be around this evening. Got to take care of a few things with Pauline and have dinner." Wayne stood up and moved aside. Alice walked up quickly and learned to hug Bud. I bet a bit awkwardly. Her eyes were already with tears after seeing Bud back home. The stretcher was wheeled slowly toward the doors of the manor, with Alice holding Bud's hand and slowly alongside. But Bud, his eyes briefly grimaced slightly at the pain in his side swelled a bit. He was happy to be home and to see Alice again, but wasn't sure how long he would be there. Later in the evening, Wayne arrived and sat with Bud, who wrote a legal pad since his voice was still failing, but had Alice to leave them, talk a bit, and brushed herself in the kitchen making food for Bud since she wasn't up to cooking yet. When Wayne left a few hours later, a deal had been struck between the two men, but there was no mention of what it meant. Alice was just happy to have Bud back and didn't ask a lot of questions. Later in the week, Wayne could be seen talking. Later in the week, Wayne could be seen talking in husband whispers to a few of the fellow residents and swore them to secrecy at Bud's request. Love and Jello, page 107. No one dared to reveal the plans that were part of. In a week, everyone would know anyway, but until then, it was best kept quiet. A few had said no to Wayne's plan, not wanting to get involved with such a crazy situation. But others said yes, exactly because it was just that, a little adventure mixed with some craziness was not on these people, given the number of people who knew that were going to happen. It was amazing that the rumor mill at the manor had not started churning out false facts and criticism, which was the norm in most cases. Wayne had a lot to do with this since had not outright threatened anyone who discussed the plan, but he made it known that things could be made difficult for anyone who did. "I ain't saying get a beating, but I'm saying I'll be sorely disappointed if you blab about this to anyone," Wayne said. Just before the management closed the office for the day, Ruth was busy cleaning as she always did. She wiped away every surface, cleaned the bathroom and the office, and was busy straightening magazines, vacuuming and finishing up her self appointed chores. Bob, the driver of the escape shuttle, had come into his daily forms and left the day. The office people were finishing up and getting ready to leave. Ruth said goodnight and went down the hall in her apartment where Eddie was waiting. He had a scowl on his face. The cable went out as he was watching the People's Court, as he did every afternoon. What's going up with this cable? Eddie asked, clearly irritated. Page 108, Love and Jello. And I'll be back in just a minute. I'm going to read to 110, and then I'll just be a few minutes. Okay, where was I? Okay, page 108, Love and Jello. I don't know, dear, but I'm sure God has a plan for it, Ruth smiled. I hope the cable company does too, Eddie remarked. This stuff has been happening way too long, and they don't seem to have clues what the problem is yet. I saw the technicians poking around again yesterday. I asked if they fixed it, and they all could say, "Not yet, not sir. I'll be dead and buried before them get sorted out." Going to look at the wiring, they said. Wiring my ass. Probably a bunch of raccoons chewing on the damn wire somewhere. Every time they take a bite, it screws with my cable. Ruth nodded, smiling. God loves the raccoons too, dear. Well, sure don't love me knocking out the freaking cable every other day as he does. Oh, Eddie, don't blame God. He isn't concerned with the cable. It's more important to do things to dear Ruth said knowingly all too well to Eddie didn't care. He just wanted his cable. Page 109. Love and Jello. Let's walk down to the oven a minute and get something to eat, dear. They have a Thanksgiving in July dinner special, turkey and all the trimmings for $9.95 a person, with dessert included, Ruth said. Thanksgiving in July? Huh? How about that can it be? Eddie wondered about suddenly hungry. As Eddie and Ruth were making their way out to the door to the apartment, the cable came back on. Freaking raccoons, Eddie yelled to no one in particular. Faith had just sat down to eat. Her daughter Carol had brought some chicken from Crystal's earlier. Faith usually wasn't hungry, but the excitement of Wayne's plan and arguing with Carol had given her an appetite. Carol had her reservations with Wayne's plan and voiced them to Faith when she learned of it. But Faith countered that she was old enough to make her own decisions and not so old Carol needed to make them yet for her. Faith plunged her mobility chair to charge it up. It was working what she wear for the occasion. She had not left the manor in a while, except for Carol to the doctor's appointments and the operation recently to have pacemakers replaced. She was not speaking to Seth, her son, recently, since it was decided they wouldn't be coming to visit. Page 110, Love and Jello. And this will be my final page before through this part. Faith anytime soon. They used to close since Carol was closer to her father before he passed, but lately it seemed Seth was avoiding visiting her. Hopefully things would be right themselves this time, all Faith could hope for. Hope seemed to escape her with the death of her husband, the abandonment from Don, and now seemingly from her only son. Faith sighed and started on her chicken. I need adventure anyway, she thought to herself. Maybe Don will be there too. Faith had not talked to Don more than a few times since their falling out a while back. She didn't understand what kept him away. When she had talked to him recently, he had made some vague remarks about them both being in different circles, or some such nonsense which left her more confused. She understood that he was upset, but not too upset to the point that he could avoid her for months. Excuse me. She obsessed over the conversations and truly did miss him. Faith waffled between despair over the relationship ending and annoyances, thinking he was it just an ass. Just made her saying he was crazy, although he had attended Henry Ford High School and not had taken Psychology 101 for 4 years, which Don seemed to pride himself on. She was an idiot, nor was she crazy. She graduated high school at, and that includes page 110. I'll come back in the next ones and do 111 through at least through 138, were the epilogue. Okay, thank you. And make sure to pick up your own personal copy of Love and Jello. It's one of Matt Riffenberg and Kathy Godin's books, and I think you'll be very surprised. See y'all soon. And remember, you are important. Thank you.